Jasmine Crockett was not your average lawyer. Known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, she had built a reputation as someone who could walk into any courtroom and leave with a win. Her confidence wasn't just an act. It came from years of experience and countless victories. This time, however, she was stepping into uncharted territory. The defendant? None other than Elon Musk, the tech billionaire whose name had become synonymous with innovation, ambition, and controversy. The case revolved around allegations that one of Musk's ventures had crossed ethical lines. Details were murky, but Jasmine believed she had enough evidence to make her argument stick. She spent weeks preparing, poring over documents late into the night, determined to bring Musk down a peg or two. In her mind, this wasn't just about winning. It was personal. Musk's larger-than-life persona rubbed her the wrong way, and she saw this trial as a chance to show the world that no one, not even someone as powerful as him, was above accountability. Walking into the courtroom that first morning, Jasmine felt ready. She wore her signature black suit, tailored perfectly to command attention. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way to the plaintiff's table. Reporters packed the room, cameras flashing and pens scribbling furiously. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. This was the kind of high-profile showdown people couldn't look away from. On the other side of the room sat Musk, flanked by his team of top-tier attorneys. Unlike Jasmine, he seemed almost casual, leaning back in his chair with an air of quiet confidence. His expression gave nothing away, which only fueled Jasmine's determination. She told herself that behind that calm exterior, he had to be nervous. After all, most people would be intimidated facing someone like her in court. When the judge called the room to order, Jasmine stood up, her voice steady and commanding as she began laying out her case. She didn't hold back, painting a picture of a man so consumed by his own vision that he ignored rules and consequences. Every accusation she leveled was backed by what she believed was solid evidence: emails, financial records, expert testimonies. Her tone was firm, almost theatrical, as if she were performing for the jury. At times, she shot pointed glances at Musk, daring him to react. But Musk didn't bite. Instead, he listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes on a legal pad. When it came time for cross-examination, Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice dripping with challenge, "would you agree that these actions demonstrate a blatant disregard for ethical standards?" Musk paused for a moment before answering. When he finally spoke, his response was calm and measured. "I think what we're seeing here is a misunderstanding of intent versus outcome," he said, his tone neutral but confident. Then, without missing a beat, he turned the question around. "Wouldn't you agree, counselor, that good intentions can sometimes lead to imperfect results?" Jasmine blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She hadn't expected him to counter her so smoothly, but she quickly recovered, pressing on with more questions, each one designed to corner him. Yet no matter how hard she pushed, Musk remained unfazed. He answered every question with precision, often using her own words to highlight gaps in her arguments. By the end of the day, Jasmine walked out of the courtroom feeling uneasy. For the first time in her career, she wondered if she'd underestimated her opponent. Musk wasn't just some tech mogul playing at being a businessman. He was smart, strategic, and clearly prepared for whatever she threw at him. As she climbed into her car and headed home, she replayed the day's events in her mind. One thing was certain: this trial wasn't going to be as straightforward as she'd hoped. If anything, it might turn out to be the toughest battle of her life. The second day of the trial started with Jasmine determined to regain control. She had spent the night replaying every moment from the previous day, dissecting Musk's responses and strategizing new ways to throw him off balance. Her confidence was shaken, but she wasn't about to back down. If anything, she felt a fire burning inside her, a mix of frustration and determination that pushed her to dig deeper. As the courtroom filled up again, Jasmine took her seat, her eyes scanning the room. Reporters were buzzing, eager to see how the drama would unfold. The jury looked alert, their expressions giving nothing away. And then there was Musk, sitting calmly at the defense table as if he didn't have a care in the world. That calmness infuriated Jasmine. It was like he knew something she didn't, and it made her even more determined to crack his facade. When the judge called for proceedings to begin, Jasmine stood up, ready to go on the offensive. This time, she decided to focus less on grand statements and more on specifics, details she thought would trip Musk up. She started by presenting emails between Musk and his team, highlighting phrases she claimed showed reckless decision-making. "Does this sound like someone who cares about following the rules?" she asked rhetorically, her voice rising slightly for emphasis. But Musk didn't flinch. When it came time for him to respond during cross-examination, he leaned forward, just enough to show engagement without looking defensive. "Context matters," he said simply, explaining that the emails Jasmine cited were part of brainstorming sessions where ideas were tossed around freely before being refined. He went on to describe how those discussions eventually led to safer, more responsible decisions. To Jasmine's dismay, he sounded reasonable, even convincing. Frustrated but unwilling to let up, Jasmine shifted tactics midstream. She began peppering Musk with rapid-fire questions, hoping to catch him off guard. "Would you say these actions put profits over safety?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "And what about your responsibility to the public? Don't you think cutting corners compromises trust?" Musk paused briefly, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Then, with a small smile, he replied, "Trust isn't built overnight, and neither is progress. Every step we take involves risk, but our goal has always been to move forward responsibly." His answer was smooth, almost rehearsed, yet it resonated with the jury. Jasmine noticed some of them nodding along, clearly buying into his narrative. By lunchtime, Jasmine was fuming. She couldn't understand how Musk kept turning her attacks into opportunities to shine, while others ate sandwiches and sipped coffee in the courthouse cafeteria. She sat alone at a corner table, flipping through her notes. She scribbled furiously, trying to find weak spots in Musk's armor. Was there anything he hadn't accounted for? Any angle she hadn't explored? After lunch, Jasmine returned to the courtroom with renewed energy. She decided to pivot entirely, focusing on Musk's personality rather than just the facts of the case. "Let's talk about leadership," she declared, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "Is it fair to say that leaders must set an example? That they can't afford to cut corners or bend rules because others are watching?" It was a clever move. She was trying to paint Musk as someone who prioritized ambition over ethics. But, once again, Musk countered her argument effortlessly. "Leadership means taking responsibility," he said, leaning forward slightly. "And yes, sometimes that means making tough calls. But I've always believed that transparency is key. We admit mistakes, learn from them, and improve." Jasmine clenched her jaw, realizing she was losing ground. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting the story right in front of everyone. He portrayed himself not as a reckless billionaire, but as a visionary striving to make the world better. It was infuriating and effective. As the day wore on, Jasmine tried one last desperate tactic: personal intimidation. She raised her voice during objections, used dramatic pauses to build tension, and even threw in a few thinly veiled insults about Musk's wealth and influence. But instead of rattling him, these moves only made her seem overly aggressive. Some jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and Jasmine could feel the tide turning against her. By the time court adjourned for the day, Jasmine left feeling drained. As she walked to her car, her mind raced with doubts. She had thrown everything she had at Musk, but he still stood tall, unshaken. For the first time in her career, she questioned whether she was outmatched, not just legally, but intellectually. Musk wasn't just playing defense, he was outthinking her at every turn. That night, Jasmine lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the day's events over and over, searching for answers. How could she beat someone who seemed to anticipate her every move? What strategy could possibly work when nothing else had? One thing was clear: she needed to rethink her entire approach. The next day wouldn't just be another round in the courtroom. It would be a test of her adaptability, resilience, and creativity. And Jasmine knew she had to rise to the challenge, or risk losing everything. The third day of the trial dawned with a sense of urgency for Jasmine. She had spent most of the night pacing her apartment, replaying every misstep from the previous days and brainstorming ways to regain control. This wasn't just about winning, anymore. It was personal. Every time Musk countered her arguments or turned her questions back on her, it felt like a direct challenge to her competence. And Jasmine didn't take challenges lightly. When she arrived at the courthouse, she carried herself with renewed purpose. Gone was the frustration that had seeped into her tone the day before. Instead, she walked in with her head held high, her expression calm but focused. If Musk thought he could outlast her, he was wrong. Today, she decided, would be different. As the judge called the courtroom to order, Jasmine stood up and approached the podium. She had prepared something new, a strategy designed to overwhelm Musk with technical details. She believed that if she buried him under layers of complexity, he wouldn't have room to maneuver. After all, how much could someone whose life revolved around rockets and electric cars really know about legal intricacies? Jasmine began by calling an expert witness, a respected academic who specialized in corporate ethics. The professor took the stand, launching into a detailed explanation of industry regulations and standards. Charts and graphs filled the screen. Behind them as Jasmine guided the testimony, highlighting areas where Musk's venture allegedly fell short. Her questions were sharp and pointed, forcing the professor to elaborate on potential violations. To anyone watching, it seemed like airtight evidence. But when it came time for cross-examination, Musk leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. He asked the professor to clarify certain points, probing deeper into the data. So, according to this chart, he said, gesturing toward the screen, you're saying compliance is measured not just by outcomes, but also intent? The professor hesitated, unsure how to respond. Musk pressed further, breaking down the professor's arguments until they sounded less damning and more open to interpretation. Jasmine watched in disbelief as Musk dismantled her carefully constructed case piece by piece. It wasn't just that he understood the material, it was that he made it accessible. When the professor stumbled over a particularly complex term, Musk stepped in, rephrasing it in simpler language for the jury. What we're talking about, here, he explained, is whether good intentions can sometimes lead to imperfect results, and I think we'd all agree that's human nature. The jury nodded along, clearly appreciating Musk's ability to simplify things. Jasmine felt her stomach sink. What was supposed to be her strongest weapon, the overwhelming weight of technical evidence, was now working against her. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was educating the jury, framing the entire narrative in his favor. Determined not to give up, Jasmine switched gears again. She brought out another document, a lengthy report detailing alleged inconsistencies in Musk's company practices. She read excerpts aloud, emphasizing phrases that painted a picture of negligence. But instead of backing down, Musk interrupted, her mid-sentence. "Objection," he said calmly, surprising everyone in the room. Normally, such objections came from lawyers, not defendants themselves. Yet Musk handled it with ease, pointing out that Jasmine was selectively quoting passages out of context. The judge agreed, instructing Jasmine to stick to the full text rather than cherry-picking lines. Flustered but undeterred, Jasmine tried to recover, reading the entire paragraph this time. But Musk was ready. As soon as she finished, he leaned forward and said, "Thank you for sharing that. Now let me explain what comes next." He proceeded to walk the jury through the rest of the document, showing how the very same report praised his company's efforts to address issues and improve processes. By now, Jasmine was visibly rattled. She hadn't anticipated that Musk would take such an active role in dismantling her case. Most defendants stayed quiet, letting their lawyers do the heavy lifting. But Musk was different. He thrived under pressure, turning every accusation into an opportunity to showcase his preparation and intelligence. As the afternoon wore on, Jasmine grew increasingly desperate. She started raising her voice during objections, trying to disrupt Musk's rhythm. At one point, she even accused him of manipulating facts to suit his narrative. But instead of getting defensive, Musk smiled faintly. "Manipulation implies deceit," he said coolly. "I prefer to call it clarity. Sometimes people see what they want to see, counselor. My job today is to show the truth." Those words hit Jasmine like a punch to the gut. For all her years of experience, she realized she was fighting someone who played chess while she was still stuck on checkers. Musk wasn't just answering her questions, he was thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating her moves and countering them before she even made them. By the time court adjourned for the day, Jasmine left the courtroom feeling defeated. Walking to her car, she replayed the day's events in her mind, searching for answers. How could she possibly win against someone who seemed to thrive in chaos? Was there any way to level the playing field? That night, Jasmine sat alone in her office, staring at stacks of files and notes spread across her desk. She knew she couldn't keep relying on intimidation or technical jargon. It wasn't working. If she wanted to turn the tide, she needed to find a new angle, something Musk wouldn't expect. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but beneath it burned a flicker of determination. Tomorrow would be another day, and Jasmine vowed to come back stronger. She refused to let Elon, Musk, or anyone else walk away unchallenged. The 4th day of the trial began with a heavy cloud hanging over Jasmine. She hadn't slept much the night before, her mind racing with doubts and half-formed ideas. Every strategy she had tried so far, intimidation, technical overload, personal attacks, had failed to shake Musk. He wasn't just holding his ground. He was building momentum, turning every accusation into an opportunity to showcase his strengths. Jasmine knew she needed to change the game entirely if she wanted any chance of winning. As she walked into the courtroom, she carried herself differently. Gone was the fiery confidence that had marked her earlier appearances. In its place was a quieter determination, almost like she was recalibrating in real time. She didn't sit down immediately, but instead stood near the plaintiff's table, flipping through papers as though searching for something specific. Her silence drew curious glances from reporters and members of the jury alike. For once, all eyes weren't on Musk. They were on her. When the judge called for proceedings to begin, Jasmine rose slowly, her movements deliberate. Instead of diving straight into evidence or arguments, she started with a question directed at the jury. "What does accountability mean to you?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. It caught everyone off guard, including Musk. This wasn't the aggressive lawyer they had seen before. It was someone trying to connect on a deeper level. Jasmine went on to explain how accountability wasn't just about following rules, but about owning up to mistakes and making things right. She spoke passionately, weaving a narrative about responsibility and trust. Her words resonated with some jurors who nodded along thoughtfully, but Jasmine wasn't done yet. She shifted gears, bringing up examples of companies that had faced scandals and recovered by taking bold steps toward transparency. It was a risky move. She was essentially praising qualities that Musk himself often touted, but Jasmine hoped it would work in her favor. If she could frame accountability as the ultimate measure of leadership, she might be able to corner Musk into admitting fault without directly accusing him. At least that was the plan. Musk listened intently, his expression unreadable. When it came time for cross-examination, Jasmine turned to him with a new kind of question. "Do you believe your company has always acted responsibly?" she asked, her voice steady but probing. Musk hesitated for just a fraction of a second, enough for Jasmine to notice. Then he leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely on the table. "Responsibility is complicated," he said finally. "We strive to do the right thing, but no one gets everything perfect. What matters is how we respond when challenges arise." Jasmine seized on his answer, pressing further. "So you admit there have been missteps?" she asked, her tone sharpening slightly. "And what steps have you taken to ensure those missteps don't happen again?" Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he launched into an explanation of initiatives his company had implemented to address concerns raised during the trial. He used simple language, avoiding jargon, and even drew a diagram on a whiteboard to illustrate his points. The jury watched closely, clearly impressed by his ability to break down complex issues into digestible pieces. But Jasmine wasn't ready to concede. She shifted tactics again, this time focusing on inconsistencies in Musk's responses. She pointed out moments where his answers seemed to contradict earlier statements, challenging him to clarify. "You've said multiple times that intent matters more than outcome," she said, her voice rising slightly. "But isn't it true that outcomes are what affect people's lives? Don't actions speak louder than words?" Musk paused, considering her question carefully. "Actions matter," he agreed. "But so does context. Sometimes, good intentions lead to imperfect results. That doesn't mean we stop trying. It means we learn and adapt." The exchange continued back and forth, each side trading blows while the jury looked on captivated. Jasmine pushed harder, digging into details she hoped would expose cracks in Musk's defense. Yet no matter how hard she pressed, Musk remained composed, answering each question with clarity and precision. By lunchtime, Jasmine felt drained. She retreated to a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she barely tasted. Despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control of the narrative. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting the story, framing himself as a leader committed to growth and improvement. Every time she threw a punch, he absorbed it and turned it into a lesson. After lunch, Jasmine returned to the courtroom with one last idea, a risky gamble she hoped would shift the momentum. She called another witness, this time someone who had worked closely with Musk's company in the past. The witness described internal debates and decisions, painting a picture of chaos behind the scenes. Jasmine leaned heavily on these testimonies, emphasizing moments of confusion and disagreement. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. Some jurors exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions suggesting doubt. But then Musk stepped in, asking questions that reframed the testimony. He highlighted areas where disagreements had led to better solutions, portraying conflict not as a weakness, but as a sign of healthy collaboration. By the end of the day, Jasmine left the courtroom feeling both frustrated and exhausted. She had thrown everything she had at Musk, yet he still stood tall, unshaken. As she drove home, her mind replayed the day's events, searching for answers. How could she possibly win against someone who thrived under pressure? Was there anything left to try? That night, sitting alone in her office, Jasmine realized something unsettling. Maybe the problem wasn't Musk. It was her. Maybe she had been approaching this case all wrong, focusing too much on attacking him and not enough on connecting with the jury. If she wanted to turn the tide, she needed to stop thinking like a lawyer trying to win and start thinking like a storyteller trying to inspire. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but beneath it burned a flicker of hope. Tomorrow would be another day, and Jasmine vowed to come back stronger, not just as a lawyer, but as someone willing to fight for justice, in a way that truly mattered. The fifth day of the trial began with Jasmine feeling like she was standing on shaky ground. The previous nights had been restless, her mind replaying every misstep and missed opportunity. She realized now that Musk wasn't just a tech billionaire. He was a master storyteller, weaving his narrative so seamlessly that it felt almost impossible to unravel. But Jasmine wasn't one to give up easily. If anything, this realization only fueled her determination. Today, she decided, would be different. When she entered the courtroom, there was something noticeably changed about her demeanor. Her usual, sharp-edged confidence had softened into a quiet resolve. She didn't rush to the podium or immediately dive into arguments. Instead, she took her time, organizing her notes with deliberate care. Reporters whispered among themselves, sensing that something was shifting in the air. Even Musk, who typically exuded calmness, seemed to sit a little straighter, as if sensing an impending challenge. As the judge called for proceedings to begin, Jasmine stood up slowly. Instead of launching into evidence or accusations, she turned directly to the jury. Let's talk about trust, she said, her voice steady but warm. It was a simple opening, yet it carried weight. Trust, a word everyone understood, a concept that resonated deeply. She went on to explain how trust wasn't built overnight and couldn't be bought with wealth or power. Trust is earned through actions, not promises, she continued, her eyes scanning the jurors' faces. And when those actions fall short, we have a responsibility to ask why. For the first time in days, the room fell silent, not because Jasmine was yelling or making bold accusations, but because her words struck a chord. Some jurors leaned forward slightly, their expressions softening as they listened. Musk watched intently, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. He hadn't expected this shift in tone, and it showed. Jasmine pressed on, bringing up examples from everyday life, small moments where trust mattered most. A parent keeping their child safe, a friend honoring a promise, a business delivering what it advertised. Simple stories, relatable and human. Then, without warning, she pivoted back to the case at hand. Now imagine putting that same level of trust in someone who has the power to shape industries, influence millions, and make decisions that affect lives worldwide, she said, pausing for effect. Wouldn't you expect them to hold themselves to the highest standard? It was a clever move, framing Musk's actions not just as corporate decisions but as moral choices. For a brief moment, the jury seemed to waver, their focus shifting from Musk's charisma to the gravity of his responsibilities. Jasmine could see it in their eyes. They were listening. But Musk wasn't about to let her take control without a fight. When it came time for cross-examination, he leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You're absolutely right," he began, surprising everyone. "Trust is everything, and I've spent my career trying to build it, not just through words, but through action." He proceeded to share anecdotes of his own, highlighting moments where his companies had gone above and beyond to address concerns and improve processes. His delivery was smooth, almost conversational, as if he were sharing stories over coffee rather than defending himself in court. Jasmine watched closely, noting how Musk's storytelling captivated the jury. She realized then that she couldn't outshine him by matching his style. She needed to disrupt it. So when it was her turn to speak again, she switched tactics once more. This time she focused on vulnerability, a concept she knew Musk rarely displayed publicly. "Let me ask you something," she said, turning to Musk. "Have you ever made a mistake? A real, honest-to-goodness error that kept you up at night?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Musk hesitated, his usual composure faltering for just a second. It was subtle, but Jasmine caught it, and so did the jury. "I think anyone who says they haven't made mistakes is lying," Musk replied finally, his tone measured but tinged with reflection. "What matters is how you respond to them." Jasmine seized the moment, leaning in slightly. "Exactly," she said, her voice firm. "How you respond defines your character. But responding isn't just about fixing problems, it's about acknowledging them openly and honestly." She turned back to the jury. "If someone refuses to admit fault, how can we trust them to do better next time?" The courtroom grew quieter, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Musk sat silently, processing her argument. For the first time, he didn't counter immediately. Instead, he scribbled something on his legal pad, his expression unreadable. Desperate to regain momentum, Jasmine pushed harder, focusing on specific instances where Musk's company had allegedly avoided accountability. She presented emails and internal memos, pointing out language that suggested deflection rather than ownership. "This isn't about perfection," she emphasized. "It's about honesty. About saying, yeah, we messed up and here's how we're going to fix it." Musk listened carefully, letting her finish before responding. When he finally spoke, his tone was softer, almost introspective. "Mistakes happen," he admitted. "I won't deny that. What I will say is that we've always strived to learn from those mistakes and improve. That's not an excuse. It's a commitment." His admission caught Jasmine off guard. She had expected denial or deflection, not acknowledgement. For a moment, she wondered if she had underestimated him yet again. By admitting fault, even partially, Musk had shifted the narrative once more, portraying himself not as infallible but as human. As the day wore on, Jasmine found herself struggling to regain control. Every time she tried to press further, Musk responded with calm, measured answers that resonated with the jury. Frustration bubbled beneath her surface, but she forced herself to stay composed. Losing her temper wouldn't help. She needed to think strategically. By the time court adjourned, Jasmine left the courtroom feeling conflicted. On one hand, she had managed to create cracks in Musk's armor, forcing him to acknowledge imperfections. On the other hand, he had turned even those cracks into opportunities to showcase humility and growth. Walking to her car, she replayed the day's events in her mind, searching for answers. How could she possibly win against someone who thrived on adaptation? That night, sitting alone in her office, Jasmine realized something profound. This trial wasn't just about evidence or arguments. It was about perception. Musk had mastered the art of shaping how others saw him, turning every challenge into a chance to reinforce his image. If she wanted to beat him, she needed to do the same, not by attacking him relentlessly, but by offering a vision the jury could believe in. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but beneath it burned a flicker of hope. Tomorrow would be another day, and Jasmine vowed to come back stronger, not just as a lawyer, but as someone willing to inspire change. The sixth day of the trial dawned with a strange tension in the air. Jasmine had spent most of the night pacing her apartment, replaying every moment from the previous days and trying to piece together what she had missed. Musk's unexpected admission about mistakes the day before had thrown her off balance. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he delivered them, with a sincerity that felt genuine. For the first time, Jasmine began to wonder if she was fighting a losing battle, not because of Musk's legal strategies, but because of something deeper, his ability to connect on a human level. When she arrived at the courthouse, she carried herself with a mix of caution and resolve. She knew today would be critical. If she couldn't regain control of the narrative, the jury might slip entirely out of reach. As reporters buzzed around, snapping photos and whispering predictions, Jasmine took her seat without saying a word. Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Musk, who sat calmly as usual. But there was something different about him today. A subtle softness in his expression, almost like he was reflecting on the weight of the trial. As the judge called for proceedings to begin, Jasmine stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. Instead of diving straight into arguments or evidence, she turned to the jury with an openness she hadn't shown before. "Yesterday we talked about trust," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Today I want to talk about responsibility. Not just the kind that comes after mistakes are made, but the kind that prevents them in the first place." It was a bold move, shifting the focus away from Musk's past actions and onto broader principles. Jasmine went on to describe how responsible leadership meant anticipating challenges, setting clear standards, and holding oneself accountable even when no one was watching. She spoke passionately, her words flowing naturally as though she were sharing a personal belief rather than presenting a legal argument. Some jurors nodded along, their expressions thoughtful, while others scribbled notes, clearly engaged. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. She shifted gears, bringing up examples of leaders who had faced similar challenges and risen above them by taking decisive action. She highlighted moments where accountability had led to transformation, not just for individuals but for entire organizations. "Change starts with honesty," she said, her tone firm but compassionate. "And honesty requires courage." Musk listened intently, his expression unreadable. When it came time for cross-examination, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely on the table. "Courage is important," he agreed, his voice calm but reflective. "But so is innovation. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks that might seem reckless to outsiders but are necessary for progress." Jasmine seized on his response, pressing further. "Progress is valuable," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "But at what cost? When does innovation cross the line into recklessness, and who decides?" Musk paused, considering her question carefully. Then, with a small smile, he replied, "I think the line between innovation and recklessness is often drawn in hindsight. What matters is intention, and whether you're willing to own the consequences of your choices." The exchange continued back and forth, each side trading blows while the jury looked on, captivated. Jasmine pushed harder, digging into specific instances where Musk's decisions had allegedly prioritized speed over safety. She presented emails and internal documents, pointing out language that suggested shortcuts had been taken. "This isn't about perfection," she emphasized. "It's about making sure people aren't put at risk in the name of ambition." Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he responded with clarity and precision, explaining the context behind each decision and highlighting steps his company had taken to address concerns. He used simple language, avoiding jargon, and even shared anecdotes about lessons learned along the way. His delivery was smooth, almost conversational, as if he were inviting the jury to see things from his perspective. By lunchtime, Jasmine felt drained. She retreated to a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she barely tasted. Despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing ground. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was reframing the entire conversation, turning accusations into opportunities to showcase growth and resilience. After lunch, Jasmine returned to the courtroom with one last idea, a risky gamble she hoped would shift the momentum. She called another witness, this time someone who had worked closely with Musk's company in the past. The witness described internal debates and decisions, painting a picture of chaos behind the scenes. Jasmine leaned heavily on these testimonies, emphasizing moments of confusion and disagreement. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. Some jurors exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions suggesting doubt. But then Musk stepped in, asking questions that reframed the testimony. He highlighted areas where disagreements had led to better solutions, portraying conflict not as a weakness, but as a sign of healthy collaboration. As the day wore on, Jasmine grew increasingly desperate. She resorted to personal attacks, subtly, implying that Musk's wealth made him untouchable. "You have resources most people can only dream of," she said, her tone sharp. "Doesn't that give you a responsibility to go above and beyond, to set an example for others?" Musk paused, letting her words hang in the air. Then, with quiet conviction, he replied, "Wealth doesn't make me infallible. It gives me tools to create change, but it also comes with scrutiny, and I welcome that scrutiny because it pushes me to do better." His response struck a chord with the jury, who nodded along, clearly appreciating his humility. Jasmine clenched her jaw, realizing she had miscalculated again. Attacking Musk personally only made him more relatable, more human. By the end of the day, Jasmine left the courtroom feeling defeated. Walking to her car, she replayed the day's events in her mind, searching for answers. How could she possibly win against someone who thrived under pressure? Was there anything left to try? That night, sitting alone in her office, Jasmine realized something unsettling. Maybe the problem wasn't Musk. It was her approach. She had been so focused on attacking him that she had forgotten the most important part of any trial, the jury. If she wanted to turn the tide, she needed to stop thinking like a lawyer trying to win and start thinking like a storyteller trying to inspire. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but beneath it burned a flicker of hope. Tomorrow would be another day, and Jasmine vowed to come back stronger, not just as a lawyer, but as someone willing to fight for justice in a way that truly mattered. The final day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Reporters packed the benches, whispering excitedly about how this high-stakes showdown would end. The jury looked tense but alert, their expressions giving nothing away. Jasmine walked into the room with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in days. She had spent the night reflecting on everything that had gone wrong and right during the trial. For once, she wasn't thinking about winning or losing. She was focused on telling a story that mattered. As the judge called for proceedings to begin, Jasmine stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She turned to the jury, taking a deep breath before speaking. "This case isn't just about evidence or arguments," she began, her voice soft but steady. "It's about values, the principles we choose to live by and the impact those choices have on others." Her tone was different today, not aggressive, not defensive, but deeply human. She went on to describe how trust, accountability, and responsibility weren't abstract concepts but real forces that shaped lives every day. Jasmine didn't rely on technical jargon or dramatic accusations. Instead, she painted a picture of what could happen when leaders failed to prioritize people over profits. She shared stories, simple, relatable examples of how small decisions could ripple outward, affecting families, communities, and even entire industries. "When someone has the power to shape the future," she said, her eyes locking onto the jury, "they carry a responsibility to do so thoughtfully, and if they don't, it's our job to hold them accountable." For the first time in the trial, the room fell completely silent. Even Musk, who had remained unshakable throughout, seemed to listen more intently than usual. Some jurors leaned forward slightly, their expressions softening as they absorbed her words. Jasmine realized then that she wasn't just fighting for a verdict, she was fighting for something bigger, the belief that justice mattered no matter how powerful the opponent. When it came time for closing arguments, Musk rose to speak. He didn't try to counter Jasmine's emotional appeal directly. Instead, he took a moment to acknowledge the weight of the trial. "This hasn't been easy for anyone," he admitted, his voice calm but tinged with reflection. "But I believe we're here because we care about doing things the right way. Mistakes have been made, I won't deny that. But mistakes are part of growth. What defines us is how we respond." He went on to describe his vision for the future, emphasizing innovation, transparency, and accountability. His delivery was polished, almost inspiring, as he tied together all the threads of the case. To Jasmine's frustration, some jurors nodded along, clearly moved by his words. It was a masterclass in persuasion, one last attempt to win hearts and minds. When both sides finished their closing statements, the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations. As they filed out of the room, Jasmine sat down heavily, feeling the weight of the past week settle over her. She hadn't delivered a flawless performance, not by a long shot, but she had given it everything she had. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud of that. Hours passed, though it felt like days, before the jury returned with a verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the foreperson stood up to deliver the decision. When the words finally came, "not guilty," Jasmine felt a mix of emotions: disappointment, exhaustion, and, strangely enough, relief. She had fought hard, pushed herself to the limit, and learned lessons she would carry with her for the rest of her career. After the judge dismissed the court, Jasmine packed up her files slowly, avoiding eye contact with Musk. But as she turned to leave, she heard his voice behind her. "You did good work," he said simply, his tone sincere. Jasmine stopped, surprised. She glanced at him briefly, then nodded curtly before walking away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around her, shouting questions about the outcome. Jasmine ignored them, climbing into her car and driving off without a word. As she sat alone in traffic, replaying the trial in her mind, she realized something important. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. She had faced one of the toughest opponents of her career and come out stronger for it. Sure, she hadn't won this time, but she had gained something far more valuable: perspective. That night, sitting in her office, Jasmine opened a blank notebook and wrote down 3 words: trust, accountability, growth. They weren't just principles she had argued in court. They were reminders of what truly mattered. Losing wasn't easy, but it taught her humility, resilience, and the importance of connecting with people on a deeper level. And as she closed the notebook and turned off the light, she smiled faintly, knowing she'd be ready for whatever came next.